music history, we've had a long line of amazing artists who utilize tools of their time, tools of their trade, to create some of the most influential art that humankind has ever seen. Now, in the guitar world, over the last 60 plus years, I think one of the most influential and important tools to ever be created is the Fender Tweed amps. When Leo Fender started designing these amps in the late 40s through the 1950s, he didn't realize it at the time, but he was creating something that would last to this day and beyond. Some of the most important and influential guitar players that have ever picked up the instrument have relied on Tweed amps over the years to get their sound, and as a result, I think we wouldn't have modern music today without these amps. I really do think it's that important. These are some of my favorite amps I've ever played, and the sound that these amps create are truly unique and one of a kind. So in today's video, we're going to try and find out, what is the Tweed sound?
Sound really encompasses a few things. To me, when Leo was coming up with his amp designs, you know, everything from 46, K&F and the Woodies and the early dual professionals, and they were going for clean. They were going for high fidelity, clean. And as the parts and his designs got more refined, he achieved that, certainly by the end of the run of the Tweed amps. To me, the Tweed sound is everything from Neil Young and Crazy Horse, where you get a deluxe that's just with a Jensen speaker that's just collapsing and it kind of does a thing, to, you know, like Robbie Robertson, at the Winterland Ballroom, for the last waltz, and what you do see a lot of common denominators in your favorite rock and roll tones, your favorite blues tones, even like there's pictures of B.B. King in the Live at the Regal, era with a dot neck and a stereo cable or, whatever. And he's plugged into a high powered Tweed twin. Why? Because it was loud. But to me, it's a little bit darker. It's more pronounced in the mid range, and they're very articulate if you get the right speaker combination. And speakers make or break the entire amplifier for me.
Now, if you're not familiar, we should define the term Tweed. Essentially, this refers to any amp that Fender was making from about 1948 to around 1960. And it's not just one amp. It's actually about a dozen or so different models that range in size and layout and power and circuit design. But we today refer to these amps as Tweed because of the covering. It's a cotton twill fabric that was popular with luggage manufacturers in the 40s, 50s, and 60s. And Fender was using it on his amps and his guitar cases because it was durable and it was easily repairable. Leo was known for being a pretty aesthetically minded individual, and he didn't like things looking used or worn out. And part of the reason behind the Tweed was it was easily repairable and replaceable when needed. Now, we should actually point out that this is not real tweed. This is not the same kind of fabric that you would use to make a tweed jacket, for example, but that's just what we've come to call it today. Now, Fender was manufacturing a lot of different amplifiers at the time, everything from low power combos like the Champ, the Harvard, and the Princeton, all the way up to super loud, high powered stuff like the high powered Tweed Twin, the Bassman, the Bandmaster, and stuff in the middle like the Tweed Deluxe. Now, each one of these amps is highly sought after today. They have their own unique sound and feel and response. But my favorite, the one that I've always liked the best, is the 57 5E3 Tweed Deluxe, the narrow panel one. It's the one everyone wants, arguably one of the most famous amps of all time. So, thinking back to the early days, what do you think Leo and the people at Fender, what do you think was going through their heads when they were designing these early Tweed amps? Because like you said, they were going for clean, but to me, there's nothing really clean about a Tweed amp. Do you think that they realized at the time what they were creating and kind of the impact that it would have on the music world?
Well, to me, Leo was a genius, and he got it right the first time, most of the times. He Look, the Strat comes out in 54. Does the Strat change much other than the difference in the neck and whatever? His early amps are pretty crude. Like I have in the living room, I have a couple of the very first Princetons. They're pre-Tweed. They're the wooden ones. And there's no volume control. The idea was the volume control was on the steel, and they were selling them as sets. And then, Leo would start running to guys like, Bob Wills and the Texas Playboys, Eldon Shamlin, and all those guys that were playing that kind of Western swing, in Bakersfield, and they were all asking me like, well, listen, we want it clean. The steel players had extra strings and they wanted it clean. So then you get amps like the Pro, with a 15. And I have a couple of his first professional amps that he made, like 47, 48, which are called the Dual Professionals. And the guitar input or the regular input is pretty mundane, but it would do what it was supposed to do with two 10-watt Jensen speakers. And it would, you put any kind of electric guitar, and it was kind of clean, and it had enough treble to make it sound somewhat hi-fi. It wasn't super hi-fi, but it was hi-fi enough for those days. And then you plug into the microphone input, which he had all intentions of people singing through. And then it's like instant, like Tres Hombres. It's like tons of gain. So by the time he got to the high-power twin, he was going for as loud and as clean as possible to service the professional Western swing market and this kind of, we want it louder, we need it cleaner. And then by the time he switched to like the Showman in like 60 or 61, and got involved with the surf scene, it was those amps, the difference between a high power twin and a white twin, it's like apples and oranges. They have very little to do with each other sonically.
Now, to me, when I think of the Tweed sound, there's one amp in particular that shines out above all else, and that is the 5E3 Tweed Deluxe. Now, 5E3 is how Fender designated that circuit design at the time, and there's earlier versions and later versions, but arguably the 5E3 Tweed Deluxe is the most popular Tweed amp in existence. And here I have a modern reissue from Fender. This is a 57 custom hand-wired reissue that Fender did supply for this video, so thank you to Fender for that. And I'm going to use it to demonstrate one of the most unique things about the Tweed Deluxe circuit. Now, my Tweed journey started about 2 years ago when I built a Mojo Tone kit, a clone of the 5E3 Tweed Deluxe circuit. A fantastic little amp. I ended up gigging it pretty consistently for about a year and a half. But when I first got it, I really didn't like it. I couldn't figure out how to get a good sound out of it, something that I liked, and I'm going to show you why here. So as you can see here, I'm plugged into the instrument input, and I'm just going to turn the volume up to 4 and let you hear what it sounds like. Actually sounds pretty great, but there's nothing clean or high fidelity or high headroom about that sound. And as you might expect, the more you turn it up, the more gain comes out. It's a great sound, but I like to run my amps on the edge of breakup. I like the ability to control how much gain is coming from the amp by how hard I'm playing, and that is pretty broken up. The same thing happens if I switch to the microphone input. Tell the tone's a little different, it's a little darker, a little more mid-forward, but still not a ton of headroom. But here we see the brilliance and the genius of Leo Fender at work. These two volume controls are interactive. They affect one another, and you can dial them in to get everything from sparkly, bright, clean tones to roaring, saturated, gainy sounds from this amp. And when I figured that out, it completely changed how I feel about the Tweed Deluxe, and it made this one of my favorite amps of all time. This truly is a desert island amp for me. So the way it works, in the instrument input, you can kind of think of the instrument volume as like a gain control of sorts, and the mic volume as your master volume or your overall output. Now that's a bit of a misnomer. This is in no way acting like a real master volume on an amp, but it does control how loud the amp's output is. The confusing thing is it's sort of backwards. You would think that the more you turn the mic volume up, the louder the amp's going to get, but actually look what happens. The higher the mic volume goes, the quieter the amp gets. So if I was going to dial in a clean-ish kind of sound, this is around where I would start. And then you can dial up the gain from there. So for me, this is my go-to Tweed Deluxe setting. The other option you have is jumping the two channels together, and this is where you can get some of the best gainy lead rock sounds ever out of this amp. To understand why this is one of the most widely used amps of all time. Everyone from Neil Young and Keith Richards and Billy Gibbons to The Edge are massive fans of Tweed amps like the Tweed Deluxe. And speaking of Neil Young, he actually figured out a really interesting way to take advantage of these interactive volume controls with his amp tech when they developed the Whizzer. This is a motorized box that sits on top of a Tweed Deluxe like this, and it has servos that control the individual volume controls as well as the tone controls. And he has a pedal board that controls it on stage, so he can essentially have different amp presets in real time. He hits a button on his pedal board, the Whizzer turns the knobs, and you have a completely different amp sound. So let's talk about the actual tone for a second, and specifically the mid-range, because to me, the mid-range, especially of a Tweed Deluxe, it sits perfectly where the guitar needs to live in the context of a mix of a full band. Not just sitting in your bedroom and playing, but when you're in a band, backing up a singer with a keys player, another guitar player. And I've heard you refer to the term mid-stacking. So what's all that about?
Okay, so one of the best things you could ever do is go to a pawn shop, buy yourself a 31 band EQ, hook it up, and all you got to do is just push frequencies up and down to understand what they do. Now, if your amp is sounding a bit thin or not punchy enough, all you need to look no further than going right to the 500 hertz, 600 hertz, and notching them up a little bit. That's the weight. Everybody goes, oh, you know, like this intangible thing. It's like when you feel it on the strings, there's this weight of a tone. That's the weight. So in concept of mid-stacking, so in my current rig, when I used to be a guitar player on the road, the twins do a thing. So they're the jet engines. They're doing the highs, the lows, as low as I get. I don't get too low. And they're doing the highest frequency that my sound will generate. They're doing a lot of that heavy lifting. They're also cleaner. Now, if I was using Bassmans are a little bit focused, a little gnarlier, a little in some cases not as tight. But you can also EQ those things to where it fills in the gap of the twin. I'm like, well, that's going to help you when you stack it with something else. It's also going to help you on stage when you go, man, this 50 watt just cut through everything, including horns, because it's voiced the right way. And a lot of your favorite guitar sounds, if you soloed them on record or live, they're not as full range as you think. They're pretty narrow, you know, like even like some of Paul Kossoff's tones. It's the combination of the guitar and the bass that was also distorted, making this full power chord.
Let's say someone has a deluxe reverb reissue and a couple of pedals, maybe an EQ. How would you recommend somebody go about kind of cloning the Tweed sound through their home rig?
Okay, so first of all, if you have a deluxe reverb or any sort of like a blackface amp, they're very scooped in the mids. That's why they get that nice chimey clean sound. The mids are scooped. The Tweed amp is the mirror image. They go like this, not like that. You have to be able to identify what you like about a certain Tweed amp sound, and most importantly, use your hands. And, you know, if you like Neil Young's like super blown up deluxe sound, turn the reverb off, okay? Turn the treble down, turn the bass up, and turn the amp all the way up. the thing will start kind of collapsing. You know, if you really want to get into it, then stick like a clean boost on it and really, you know, go after that. But it's also, you know, if you want like, you know, like Rocky Mountain Way, you know, those kind of like Joe Walsh things, you know, clearly it sounds like a Bandmaster or Champ or something like that. Then you just got to be able to go in there and carve out those frequencies that you like, either with a pedal or an EQ, and the choice of guitar. Your greatest asset in your tone and the greatest tool you have in your entire arsenal or collection are these.
So that is the Tweed sound, or at least as much of the Tweed sound as we can explore in a 20-minute YouTube video. Huge thank you to Joe Bonamassa for taking time to come on this video and lend some of his expertise. I will have the entire interview that I did with Joe linked down below over on my second YouTube channel. If you want to check that out, I would highly recommend it. It is a guitar nerd's delight. I'll also have links to his new record and his socials and everything down below as well, which I would also highly recommend you check out. If you'd like to support the channel, check out the links in the description box down below. We're currently running 25% off everything in my store if you use the code -25 at checkout. That's all linked down below. Don't forget, our next Backstage live show, our next full band live stream show will be November 21st. That's Saturday, 5 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. We're doing a tribute to Chess Records, which I'm really excited about. And if you'd like to support the band and the live stream directly, you can pick up one of these shirts linked down below as well. Let me know what you want to see next in the What is the Sound series in the comments section down below. Hope you enjoyed today's video. My name is Rhett Shull, and remember, there is no plan B.